Hi, this is Jeff Altman, the Big Game Hunter, and you're listening to Job Search Radio. One of the pleasures I have in hosting this show is meeting and speaking with many fabulous individuals with great ideas and terrific opinions. Now, Peter Conlon I met in the course of my normal work as a headhunter, and we met in New Orleans about 2 years ago. A conference, and I really enjoyed him, thought he was a smart guy, and here we talk about what it's like for people throughout the world to relocate to Australia, what the legal implications are, what the current hot markets are in Australia, for which it's more likely that you will have the opportunity to be admitted by their government. Now, as you would expect, I'm going to offer the disclaimer, always consult an attorney. But this show will give you a good basic framework for what to expect as part of the Australian process. So hang in there, enjoy the show, and please sing along with me.
Are you looking for a new job or interested in leveling up? Job Search Radio is your go-to resource for insider tips on job hunting and growing your career. Here's your host, Jeff Altman.
So my guest on this show is Peter Conlon, principal of Keystone Global, located in beautiful downtown Round Corner just outside of Sydney. Peter, welcome to Job Search Radio. Great to have you on.
Thanks, Jeff. Great to be here.
Thank you. Now, I didn't hear many words, but I heard some, and we've spoken before, and I know that accent is not Australian. So,
no, I'm an immigrant, actually. Yes, I'm from New Zealand, but I've been here a long time.
What was the process like for you to move to Australia?
Well, pretty simple for me. Being a Kiwi, it was simpler then than it is now. But being a Kiwi, I can just climb on a plane, come here, and set up camp.
Now, were you able to set up camp because you were starting a business, or because there's a reciprocity between Australia and New Zealand for employment?
There's a reciprocity, basically. Yeah, we have open access to the Australian market, and Australian workers have open access to the New Zealand market.
Nice. Like the U.S. and Canada, the U.S. and Mexico with what we call NAFTA. And, it's easy for people from Canada to find work in the U.S. and vice versa. But at the end of the day, most people don't have that benefit that you did. So what's the normal process like for people when they're looking for work and they're not Australian and they want to move to Australia?
Well, Jeff, Australia's hungry for skilled workers in particular areas, particularly the medical profession, and some other areas like electronics, software, and depending on where you're willing to live, it is more or less open. You have to go through a checklist based on literacy skills, based on your education, based on your experience. And unlike our recruiting profession, they can also discriminate on the basis of age.
Very different than the U.S. So in discriminating on the basis of age, the government is okay with this, and it's their process. They set up the rules. So they think it's okay for, I have to assume, older workers to find it more difficult to gain entry.
Yeah, and it's around a number of factors. It's around the fact that older workers are going to place a bigger burden on our government-supplied health system. If you're an Australian citizen, you get free healthcare to a particular level, which is something Obama is trying to impress upon the American people, that I believe, with some resistance. So typically, the point score would favour somebody who was in the age group of sort of 30 to 45. You would get the most points. So they have a point score. They have a number of points for your ability in English. They have a number of points for your age. They have a number of points for your qualification. And they have a number of points for the particular skill set you bring and how many years experience you've had in that skill set in the past 10 years.
Interesting. And folks, we're recording using blab.im, and someone was kind enough to comment, no age discrimination in America? No, it's not about corporate age discrimination we're talking about. We're talking about the government setting up a system to discriminate on the basis of age, which this is systematic. It's not what individual corporations might do. So we're talking about something distinctly different here. So in setting up these rules, because of the cost of health care and such, we wind up having a system benefiting younger workers. So I think when we spoke about this previously, you said there's a point system, and as such, people who are younger get more points than those that are older on that checkbox.
Yeah, exactly. There's a checkbox for that. There's a checkbox for language. For instance, if you come from an English-speaking language like the USA, like Canada, like England, you can get automatic number of points. If you sit a test for an exam called the IELTS, I believe it's called, the English language speaking or English language skills, you can actually get more points because, as you'll realise, there will be some argument from the English that, in fact, Americans don't speak English. And likewise, Australians and New Zealanders, we speak a different brand of English to the English. Ours just happens to be better.
More proper. So what I get is that there's different versions of English around the world. Yeah. And U.S. English is different than Australian English.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And what I'm saying is not that native speakers of English don't have to sit an English test. What I'm saying is that if you're a native speaker of English, you get, say, for instance, 7 points. However, if you do sit the English test and you're particularly good linguistically with English on an academic level, you might be able to score 8 or 9 points, if that makes sense.
Sure. So you have to pass your grammar test, is what it seems like.
But if you're a native speaker of English, you don't have to pass it because you will get accorded an average score anyway.
Cool. So minimally 7 points, the opportunity to increase it on top of that. Could you lose points if you test poorly?
Yeah, if you had particularly bad English skills, if you had a very rudimentary education, or you came from an area that had a particularly high level of customized English. For instance, they teach English in Papua New Guinea. However, inflected in Papua New Guinean English is a lot of pidgin words. So that somebody from Papua New Guinea might get afforded 7 points, but if they sat the test, they might do worse than that, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. So far we've been talking about the English language skills, and we've spoken about age. Now, as we were starting to talk, you were talking about that there's certain types of jobs and certain types of skills that are advantaged for immigration purposes to Australia. What sort of jobs are those?
Well, for instance, the medical profession, there are a number of areas in the medical profession where we're short of skills in Australia. But particularly when those skills are applied to a less major city environment, like one of the rural or regional major centres. So if you're a doctor and you have a particularly high level of skills in a particular specialty, you'll be welcome anywhere in Australia. If you're just a general practitioner, but you're willing to go and work in a regional area, then there will also be an opportunity for you. It may take you longer to get in, but it will be there, and you'll have to commit to staying in that regional centre for a certain period of time. And the same thing applies to a whole raft of other jobs. Where there is a shortage in any particular location, there will be an opening. And that changes from time to time, as exemplified with the mining industry. 2 years ago in the mining industry, we were begging for people to come and work in Australia. Now with the downturn in commodity prices, we have a surplus of mining people. Therefore, you'd be a long way down the list getting a job as a mining engineer. However,
Gotcha.
there are a
I'm
number
going to pause you here. I want to pause you here for 1 second because you're raising a good subject. And I also want to make sure that we pause for the insider tip for this show because I think it's a good spot to do it. And folks, on every show I do what I call a job search insider tip. And in doing this tip, today's is going to be a job search tip from the movies. And this one comes from the old movie Jerry Maguire. And if you think I'm going to be screaming, show me the money, no, I have no intention of doing that. This tip is really about what happens to Jerry after he loses his job. And he's stuck. He wants to start his own agency, is having difficulty, and he's down on his luck. What winds up happening? Well, Jerry gets support. Jerry reaches out to Renee Zellweger. Tom Cruise playing Jerry Maguire reaches out to Renee Zellweger and becomes involved with her family. And together they mount the campaign for Jerry to come back. The point I'm trying to make is for many job hunters, you try to go it alone. And you need to put together support systems. You need to put together people in your life who will encourage you, support you, and help you, and not criticize you and beat you up and punish you for just struggling. Sometimes you may need a coach. And by the way, I do coaching. You can reach out to jeffaltmancoach@gmail.com. But at the end of the day, put people in place in your life who will support you while you're struggling. It's one of the smartest things people can do. Now, before we come back to Peter, I just want to say that if you like this tip, there's a lot more at my website, which is thebiggamehunter.us. So come over to the site and go exploring. Click the tab that says blog. You'll find over 1,000 videos there, plus articles I've written for LinkedIn and my e-zine, a complimentary subscription to No BS Job Search Advice e-zine. So again, that site is thebiggamehunter.us. Let's come back to Peter and pick up. So we were talking about the medical profession and being advantaged right now, and mining now being disadvantaged after being one of those advantaged areas, and that people in the medical profession can go looking more easily. They can be invited in more readily if they're willing to go to outlying areas rather than, let's say, Sydney or Melbourne. Did I get that right?
Yeah, absolutely, you got that right. And part of the battle is it's not just the profession that's in demand. It's where your qualification and experience comes from, depending on the discipline. So if you're a civil engineer, for instance, and you've never worked in a Western country, you're going to have a harder job getting accreditation, because all of these jobs you have to gain accreditation with the local accreditation people. They've got to assess your qualification. Generally, the better the university you come from, somebody who, in the medical fraternity, for instance, somebody who's specialised at a leading institution like the Mayo Clinic or something like that is going to have an easier job getting in than somebody who's qualified in a third world country, second grade university, if that makes sense.
Sure. So to translate that for those who aren't familiar with that terminology, a lesser developed nation, and they've gone to a school that no one's ever heard of before. Might be a good translation.
That's pretty well translated. There is a convention called the Washington Accord, and if you look it up, it'll tell you in great detail. Engineering companies and a lot of medical professions prefer candidates who have an education from a university that subscribes to the Washington Accord in terms of educational standards.
Interesting. So how about teachers? Are teachers advantaged, disadvantaged, neutral?
It depends on what branch of teaching you're in. Experienced secondary teachers are much in demand. At the moment, we've had a downturn in funding for the university sector, which means there aren't the positions there to support people who are trying to immigrate. And our primary sector tends to be pretty well catered for as well. We've been churning them out at a fairly great rate, and there is a shortage of work for those people here. So much like America, if you ask the right questions and you find the sectors where there's a shortage of talent and there are empty jobs that can't be filled, those are the ones that are going to support immigration visas much better.
So what about the notion of teaching English as a foreign language to immigrants? Are you aware of any sort of special consideration for people with that fluency?
We actually have large English language colleges here in Australia who teach English language to students who come here to study. So before they can get into a university, for instance, they can come here and they can study English as a learned skill to get enough English language skill to get into a training course or a university. But if you're applying for a job here, it's assumed that you already have proven English skills, if that makes sense.
Sure. Thank you. And thanks, Nick. I appreciate the question. So coming back to some of the other things that are attractive to the Australian government, are there any other skills that, because so far we've spoken about mining now being deficient, teaching under certain circumstances, and of course the medical profession. Construction, engineering, manufacturing engineering, any of those resonate as fields that that the government would find or offer advantages to?
Yeah, specifically some of the blue collar skills are in demand here. And for instance, professions like carpentry, sheet metal, manufacturing, engineering at a blue collar level are undersubscribed because a lot of those people tend to head out and start their own businesses here and don't want to work for a wage.
Interesting. So large corporations or mid-sized firms find it difficult to find people who are willing to work for them to do these kind of jobs. Interesting.
And other professions like estimators, And they're hard to find even in the US, I think. Estimators, designers, computer-aided design specialists, people like that. And there is a link that I've sent you, I think, to include in your session notes that the government provide that shows what regional skills are in demand at a particular time, and they change.
That's pretty apparent from the way you said they responded to the downturn in the mining sector and how that became less advantaged once there were large layoffs, and Rio Tinto and others wound up not needing people for that field.
So, and there is one other way to get into Australia. Now, I don't advise climbing on a boat in Indonesia and coming here, because you'll end up in a place called Nauru, locked up in a camp for about 5 years, but you could marry an Australian.
Oh, now we're getting to the good stuff. You marry an Australian, huh? So you meet someone on blab.im and you start up a relationship and say, hey, how much would it take for us to get married? Huh?
Absolutely, but there is a certain amount of length to that process. However, a good example is a gentleman that approached me looking for a job outside of the US. He's currently in New York, and we discussed all his options, and he never mentioned until about our third conversation that he was married to an Australian. And I went, hold it, you're married to an Australian. So all he's got to do is all a person that's married to an Australian has to do is get a spousal visa, come here and be unemployed for 3 months, and then get what's called a bridging visa. And then once he's got a bridging visa, he can become employed, and then he can apply for permanent residency. And then after 2 or 3 years, he can apply to be an Australian citizen, and he's in.
That's great. So
she is in. We better say this is not a one-way process.
So a one-way process would be, I'm not sure, but obviously you need that.
I was talking about he, and I should have said he or she. Yeah. It is an egalitarian society over here, after all.
We're trying to be that way, and it came at the hands of a pen, which was a good thing. People were allowed to marry because they loved one another, perhaps because they came up with a business arrangement with one another to allow them to marry someone in the U.S. No matter. So you marry an Australian citizen. You come. You wait for your paperwork to be processed to get the bridging visa, and that lasts about 3 months.
No. It takes 3 months to get the bridging visa.
Okay.
And the bridging visa stays in place until you get another visa.
So with the bridging visa, you can find work, and then from there, until you get the next visa, which is the version of permanent residency. And how long does it take from the bridging visa to permanent residency generally?
I'm not sure. You would need to ask somebody who is an expert in going through that process. And I do advise anybody who wants to get into the process to seek the advice of a immigration attorney so that they don't trip over any stones along the way.
Yeah, I should have said that at the beginning. When all is said and done, folks, immigration attorneys are essential, because there's one thing I know about governments. If the I isn't exactly dotted over the center of that line underneath it, and if the T is not crossed 1 millimeter below the top of that line for the T, they can throw your document back and slow down the process. So always have an attorney guide you through. We're just trying to give you some broad brushstroke outlines to help frame your inquiries. How does one find an immigration attorney for Australia? Do you need to be in the country or websites?
There are websites, and you can ask me because I'll tell you some good ones. I, as a recruiter, as an international recruiter in Australia, I get a lot of queries from people from outside of Australia looking for work. And quite a lot of those queries are just simply to say, you need to talk to this person because they can best advise you. And yes, if you can find a sponsor, one of the ways in is to find a sponsor who needs your skills, and they will sponsor you, as they will in America for US jobs.
So ideally, if you're able to get a firm in Australia who says they want to hire you, that's a golden way in because you're announcing that you have a job.
Yeah, you have a job, you have a qualification that is in short supply, or a skill that's in short supply, and they've looked everywhere and can't find somebody in Australia, so they need you.
Gotcha.
And that is the golden handshake, so to speak. You did right.
Now, are there any websites that people can look for work on and apply for jobs online, and knowing that this firm may be dealing with the same issues we've been talking about? Any websites that are specific to Australia that someone can look for jobs on?
Like you have Monster in the States, we have a website. We have Seek.
Spell that.
www.seek.com.au is one of our larger websites.
Is that seek.com.au?
That's correct.
Great. Just want to make sure.
Yep. Seek.com.au. We have, if you give it on LinkedIn and you set the right search parameters, it'll tell you about Australian jobs. Same with Google. Google will alert you to search terms for Australian jobs. And there's Indeed. Indeed is, I believe, quite a large element in your environment over there. They have become very active in Australia. So if you look on Indeed, you will find Australian jobs quite prominently there. When you're looking for a job in any other country, it's to be aware of the environment, what you want from it. I think you need, I have people who come to me looking for jobs in Australia and they've done no research. And I guess really simple stuff is if you need to ask a question, ask somebody like me. You can find me on LinkedIn. My profile on LinkedIn is Keystone HR, as in human resources. And I'm quite happy to talk to anybody who wants to know more about the environment out here. Jeff and I belong to an organisation called NPA Worldwide. I have a lot of associates in Australia who specialise in various vertical niches in recruitment and skill sets, and we all talk to each other. And as I said, I'll send Jeff a link to the government website. You've got to understand that they're a bunch of bureaucrats, but there is some very valuable information there, even if it's information that gives you another question to ask somebody like me or Jeff.
Terrific. So, folks, at the end of the day, if you're interested in working in Australia, there's work that you're going to need to do. And the need for an attorney to guide you, someone like Peter who's on the ground, who can introduce you to people who might be able to help. And Peter, thank you so much for making time today. You've spoken about some of the ways that people can reach you. What are your specialties personally?
One of my specialties is finding jobs for people in the USA. I'm I'm focused on engineering and technical skills. I'm an engineer myself. I've worked in various engineering-related telecommunications businesses most of my life until I became a recruiter about 10 or 12 years ago. But basically engineering, technical, security, and putting people in hard places like Papua New Guinea and Indonesia and Africa are some of the things that really excite me about recruitment. Yeah.
Peter, thank you. And folks, we'll be back next time with more advice to help you find work more quickly in the parts of the world and the kind of work that you want to be doing. I'm Jeff Altman, the Big Game Hunter. As I mentioned earlier, if you'd like more information, if you'd like more help with job hunting, visit my website, which is thebiggamehunter.us. There's a lot there that you can watch, listen to, or read to help you find work more quickly. And if you'd like me to take a look at your resume, I critique them. I do charge for that, but I will critique your resume. Again, there's a link at thebiggamehunter.us. And just order a critique from me. You'll have it back within 36 hours at the latest. I'm Jeff Altman. Hope you enjoyed today's show. Hope you have a great week. Take care.
For more job search advice, visit Jeff's website at thebiggamehunter.us. That's thebiggamehunter.us.